about just one scenario which links the fund to universal basic income payments. And, your lecture makes me think a little bit about these pay-go systems that were set up in Social Security. And so, for example, if we have the fund and we use returns for a year to then pay out basic income, then it's going to be sensitive to the state of the cycle, the business cycle.
Correct.
So some of these questions that have come up with pay-go systems in terms of stability, I just didn't know what the link was between the paying out and the actual holding of the
Correct.
assets. So just one possible scenario for that.
Correct. Yeah. So there's the usual issue of a university endowment, how we spend it, how we disburse it, smoothing over time, and so forth. All of these issues are going to come up. Yeah. The only thing is that it's going to be a hugely diversified fund, as diversified as the economy of India by definition, right? Because every stock is going to get taxed. Nevertheless, that will not stop it from getting macroeconomic shocks, right? And so this is an issue that we discussed to some degree in the paper, but we were so caught up on creating the idea of a fund in the first place that we thought that at least let's get that on the table. And then we can talk about these other issues which are just as important, but somewhat more conventional than how to fund this fund. And I'm agreeing with that, but I'm punting on it because I just want to focus at this point on how such a fund should be set up. So like Ashish once thinking, why not do this? Why not tax this? Or we are saying, let's just do it by share dilution. Everything else is conventional.
So what's the connection? I'm trying to figure out what is the connection between the first and second parts of your talk. So is it just the motivation that there's increasing inequality in the personal distribution, which you're saying comes about because the ownership of capital will continue to be unequal or get more unequal? That's one. And then the second thing is that regarding the proposal itself, there have been lots of proposals for things like universal capital grants and so on, right? Piketty, for example, has one, but many others have proposed these things. And why is this any different or any better or whatever? Well, what's the motivation? Is it because you think that it'll be better, wealth will be better managed that way, or? Okay. So my answer to your first question is yes. The first part of my talk was indeed a motivation for the second part. And it is a motivation, but it's a very abstract philosophical motivation. None of this is happening now. I mean, or maybe it is, I don't know. But I want to think over the next 50 or 100 years, is there a general secular trend towards labor getting thrown out? And are the first intimations of this, like jobless growth or whatever, are these perhaps the first warning signs that something broader is afoot? Okay, so that's really, and not any more detail than that. The second one I would like to push back more strongly on, which is that what I really believe that share dilution as a way of building a fund has two advantages. The first advantage is that you can get at people without having to know what they hold. I think this is extremely important. Anybody working on fiscal system, not just in India, but even in developed countries like the United States, where auditing has become a real problem, will understand that there are advantages here to be gained from being able to just unilaterally dilute shares. Disadvantages too, as I keep saying, right? There could be distortions and so forth. Okay. The second advantage of doing it through share dilution is that you can mimic the corporate composition of wealth, or financial wealth in a society. You can mimic it exactly because every corporate will be paying out the same percentage in terms of dilution. Now that composition, sorry, so please go ahead.
I mean, that's this one-time thing, right? But in the real world, practice of wealth will continuously increase, and so you're going to have to keep diluting.
Yes, that was the second part of our proposal, that you dilute each time there's a share issue. You don't have to keep diluting if the existing share base is constant, because the government is going to benefit from that by the rise in the share price.
It's never going to be constant, right? In a growing economy, you're going to incorporate new wealth.
Okay, but
otherwise the incorporated wealth will be a shrinking share.
So, Maba, hear me out. There are two ways to have higher wealth. On the basis of an existing share base that's fixed, just the wealth is going up, so the share prices are going up. And the second is that you introduce new shares. Okay, these are two different things. Now, on the first, you don't have to do anything. You sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight, because the government's shareholdings would go up as well. On the second one, you have to put in the X% again. So it's not a flow tax. It's a stock tax. Does that make sense?
You're going to have to do this every time there's a new share issue, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's correct. That is indeed correct.
So that's what I'm.
But that's not the same as doing it every time wealth goes up.
As much as I see the benefits of the UBI, I was just wondering, is there a danger that the dilution of shares causes the private sector to underperform or act as a disincentive for innovation?
Right. Very good question. Okay, so this is discussed quite a bit in the paper. So there's two dangers. One is the danger which Som and I were discussing, that every new share issue, there's X%. Then there's the other danger, which is even more sinister. The second danger is, what if we decided to do another X% on the existing share base, right? Okay, so these are two different questions. The first one gives you a standard public finance distortion of the form that we get in income taxes. We have not much more to say on that matter. But the real worry is, what if there's another intrusion into the share base, right? And I think that is a real worry. And we discussed this. And somehow, can a government generate credibility by saying, we are starting this process, we have to go at the existing base, but we're going to do it once? Yeah. Well, does that need a constitutional amendment? I don't know, right? But I think we should be open enough to thinking about these issues.
My main argument is there are different structures of capital that I could choose for a firm. One is I could have a
Yes.
listed company, or I could go and take it private.
Yes,
And it's not traded anymore.
correct.
And then I could find some other loophole around it, so I don't have to, I'm not faced with the dilution. And you say that there are distortions, you don't worry about them because they're small. My argument is, do you really think that that's small if I can just take the firm private, have the same shareholder structure, but they're not shareholders anymore, they're partners?
Yes. No, so this is a fair point. Again, this is a point that we mentioned in our paper, that there's the one way to react to this distortion is to issue less shares and move towards maybe debt financing or go in the Twitter direction, right? Generally. And that may well happen. So I think I would still like to float this idea. I would still like people to think about how important is incorporatization, right? How important it is to a firm after a certain scale that it has to issue shares. If there's a certain inelasticity to that decision, then my arguments gather more credibility. And if that thing is highly elastic, then this argument goes down the drain. But but without even discussing it, we don't know. So I'm putting this up. I'm not trying to be a wimp and say I honestly don't know the answer, right? It depends on the elasticity of the importance of share issue.
So really stupid theoretical question. Let's assume that the fourth fundamental or the fourth law of capitalism is operational. So capital is inheriting the earth, share of labor is vanishing.
Yes.
That isn't particularly alarming as long as the ownership of capital is equitable, just, etc., etc.
Precisely. Yeah.
So why bother about sovereign funds and the government accumulating shares? Why not, tax them or get them and then redistribute it? It's like a second fundamental theorem of welfare economics, except of redistributing endowments. You're just, making the ownership of capital more equitable, and then letting whatever laws are operational still operate. No problem.
Exactly.